mean, here's the thing, right? There are plenty of people who have very high incomes, who are very flash, but they don't necessarily have wealth, right?
Welcome to Beyond the Velvet Rope with Neal OatesJr, the podcast that takes you on an extraordinary journey into the world of luxury service. Join us as we unlock the secrets, stories, and strategies behind exceptional experiences. From anticipating VIP needs to crafting unforgettable memories, we'll guide you on a path to service excellence in the realm of the affluent. Let's elevate your expertise and redefine the art of world-renowned service. Here's your host, Neal OatesJr.
Welcome to Beyond the Velvet Rope. I'm Neal OatesJr., your host, and I am here with a very special guest. Now, I know that podcasts have guests and podcasts have very special guests, but today I have the special guest, Mr. Adam Fayed. It's good to see you, sir. Now, you are not just anyone. You are a published author, a financial, I'm going to say guru based on the results and the impact that you've had. You are a wealth manager, entrepreneur, a trader yourself, but then also you are a regular contributor, regular columnist for Forbes. And so someone who has written 2 books. It's good to have you, sir.
No, it's a pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Now, I'm here in Miami, Florida. You are just a little bit away from me in the UAE here today. Well, today for me, tonight for you. And so if you would you be so kind as to tell our audience who Adam is?
Yes, so I'm from the UK, as you might be able to tell. My accent hasn't diluted despite being overseas for so long. I've lived overseas now for 14 years in various countries around the world, including in Southeast Asia, the Far East, Middle East, and I also had a year in Europe. Now, in 2018, I thought more and more people will go online when it comes to doing their financial services. And anyway, my niche in financial services was always the mobile people, expats and high net worth individuals. And I felt like that would go online more as time went on, because obviously we've all used eBay and Amazon for a long time, but people forget that back in, say, 2005, even 2013, not many people wanted to do things remotely for high trust services like legal and financial and so on. But I thought that would change and was changing. So I went online. Obviously, COVID happened, pushed the population more online than it already was. And yeah, that's where I am today. So we've got clients in over 100 countries, pretty much all nationalities, not literally every nationality, but if you see what I mean, people from different parts of the world, so all the continents, all the regions of the world. And we try to make things as efficient as possible by doing things online and also making people's life easier where possible when it comes to things like the bureaucracy of opening up accounts.
So Adam, here's what I love, right? One, your focus on everyone, just being inclusive, having a global customer and client base. But then what I know is you really specialize in working with high-end affluent clientele. But before we get there, I want to talk about the start. Where did this begin? I know that it's not like you just said, I'm going to do this. I grew up wanting to do this, but it was born, like Adam Fayed was born out of some frustration and, at 18 years old doing this thing. And I think it's important for the audience to hear that sometimes your frustration can pave the way. It can open up doors, especially for those that you're looking to serve. So would you just share a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so basically, I started my first investment account when I was 18, and obviously I didn't have that much money then, but it was a good learning experience. But the paperwork really wasn't that nice, to be honest with you. And then when I started in the international financial space, I realized the regulation and compliance can be actually blamed for pretty much everything. It's true to say that sometimes it is about laws and regulations in some cases, but it's still blamed for almost everything. And so a lot of procedures are just done by providers and other people, and it's actually not necessarily about regulation. Or when it is about regulation, sometimes there's an alternative, right? Because by definition, in the international finance space, there's different jurisdictions. You don't have to put your money in a Switzerland bank or Swiss bank, should I say. You could put it in a bank in another jurisdiction, maybe even up-and-coming jurisdiction like Mauritius. Also places that are established like the Far East, like Singapore and beyond. So really, I was frustrated both when I was 18, but also when I went in the financial industry, in the offshore industry, by how difficult a lot of processes were made. To put this in context, when I started my own business in 2018, hardly any of the providers used DocuSign or Adobe. They wanted clients to actually sign with pen and paper, and then DHL or use another company to actually send the documents to their head office, often in places like the Isle of Man, typical offshore jurisdictions, which is obviously silly, right, in the modern day. Now, obviously that changed during COVID. Conveniently, the providers were flexible with their regulations when COVID happened. But all those things kind of really made me realize that I can understand why people get frustrated by some of the processes when it comes to the financial industry.
And so, Adam, now as you mentioned earlier, the whole idea about these high trust industries, these high trust, I'm going to say services, where it's not just us going on eBay, we're not just going on Amazon online, but this is something where I'm like, my future is at play. And am I willing to put this and my future, maybe future for my generations, in the hands of someone online virtually? And for you to be able to do that with high net worth, affluent, successful individuals, how did you make the decision? How did it come about where not only am I going to offer this, I'm going to offer this and I'm going to get really good at doing this for the high level clientele, that high ticket individual? Where did that idea come from?
Well, I mean, there's a few things here. So first of all, we're always using third parties like banks and insurance companies and so on. So the money was never with us ourselves. It wasn't like we're going to start our own bank or something like that. We're just the advisor on the. So to answer your question, though, I felt there was a space. There was like a supply and demand mismatch because, say, in 2018. It's true to say compared to now, not many people maybe were willing to do it remotely, but the numbers were always going up, and also there was hardly anyone doing it. So ultimately, regardless of whether it's 20% or 30% of high net worth people who are willing to do it, or 50%, the number of advisors offering it at that stage was very small, unlike now. So there was certainly a mismatch. And you can always find those people as well who find it very frustrating to have to go into 2 or 3 face-to-face meetings and so on. So I would say the basic supply and demand mismatch did give us an advantage in the early days. But then obviously, as well as we got online recommendations on LinkedIn and beyond, that also helped build up some trust as well.
Okay, so now you taking or you viewing and saying there's an opportunity here based on supply and demand. You mentioned that not a lot of people were doing it. Was it an easy decision for you to say, all right, I know it's not prevalent in the industry, but I'm going to take a shot? Was that an easy decision for you, or did you have to get outside consultation? What was that piece like for you?
Nothing's easy because I was trying to do the model before, right? And every model has positives and negatives, and nothing is easy per se. But I still thought that ultimately, you've only got 24 hours in a day. And even if you live in the richest city in the world, there's only so many people you can see, whereas globally, there's so many people all around the world. Same with what people are doing in consulting or law or whatever it is, or for that matter, being a podcaster or YouTuber. There's obviously billions of people in the world, right? Not billions of wealthy people, but there's billions of people. So I always knew we only needed to capture a small percent of the market to make it work. So that really helped. But absolutely, it wasn't easy. And what helped, though, is before I went fully remote, there were some small signs that the model would work. So we had some small wins doing things remotely in the years before we went fully remote. And I think that kind of helped us just make the plunge and just decide to go fully remote.
So I love that, right? And as I was doing my research and preparing for this, you mentioned that having clients over 100 countries. So that is exciting. But my question is, when it comes to talking about financing and being an advisor to not just different countries and individuals, but different cultures, what does that look like when you have to learn or make sure that you're showing respect? And we know that different cultures have different tendencies when it comes to how much they're willing to share with a stranger, even if they're an advisor. How much did that play, or how much do you see on a daily basis where you're having to adapt? I know you're a well-traveled individual, right? You've lived in a number of countries. And so I want to ask that question before I dive into the next one, but the cultural awareness, the cultural intelligence, being able to adapt, how have you seen that play into your business?
Well, there's two aspects here. I mean, the first aspect is there are some commonalities about people who want to do things remotely online. So, for example, if you've got like a really busy executive, and they're working for a multinational company, and they are from the UK or India or wherever they are in the world, and they've been following us for a long time, let's say on social media. Ultimately, they might have cultural differences, but there are still some commonalities, if that makes sense. And also there's commonalities in terms of the people who are likely to reach out to us. Because, for example, that person who has never left their small town, who's high net worth, is much less likely to reach out, right, compared to someone who has maybe traveled around a lot and so on. Even when it comes to age, we have a lot of clients who are anything from kind of late 20s to early 70s, but, a high net worth, say 95-year-old is not likely to reach out, to us. So there are certain commonalities, and that does kind of mean that the cultural differences aren't necessarily always as big as people think, because a lot of our clients have traveled a lot themselves. They work in international environments. They're usually expats or they're returnees. They've had international exposure and then they return home, or they're future expats. They plan to kind of, retire abroad. And people like that are a bit more adventurous by nature, and that can help the whole process. However, to answer your question, there are certain cultural differences. What we have done, and we found this has worked well, we do have obviously a team under me, and they can often navigate the cultural differences sometimes. So, for example, we have a gentleman in East Africa. He's got one or two people under him. He's a local, but he's got international exposure. He deals with high net worth clients there. We've got Canadians, we've got people from different parts of the world. And of course, that can, help a lot in terms of that can help navigate the cultural differences. Likewise, we've got people from India, from Pakistan, and beyond. So definitely, I would say the key things probably are keeping to a niche, because if you keep to a niche, the right people will reach out to you from all around the world. But then number two, sometimes having people in your team who speak different languages, who are from that culture themselves, that can definitely help. Even between British and Americans, right? Obviously, compared to many countries in the world, we have more in common than say some random cultures. Ultimately, if you have a North American, say a Canadian or an American, in certain cases, it might go a bit better than a British person potentially taking the meeting or the call. Not always, but it can be like that, because familiarity, it is what it is. So I think building a team is important, but by the same token, we shouldn't just assume that anyone could do the job, right? Just because someone speaks, numerous languages and whatever, that's just part of the job. That might be one part. You can't just take a random person from the street who speaks French and expect them to do a good job, for example.
So two things. The first one is, you mentioned that many of your clientele, they are more adventurous than those who aren't more likely to call you. Adam Fayed, is he adventurous? Because I've heard about the countries and where you've lived. I see what you do. You're putting yourself out there in front of major news and media sources, CNBC, everything. So are you by nature, are you an adventurous person?
I would say I actually am, even though I come across as people say pretty calm. I would say I am adventurous by nature. I think if you're going to be an entrepreneur as well, you have to be a bit of a risk taker, a bit adventurous for numerous reasons, right? You are taking a risk. And as you say, once you put yourself out there as well, you're going to get the lovers, but you're also going to get the haters. You're going to also get people who think the wrong thing. You're going to get all kinds of things. So I think in reality, if you're an entrepreneur in any country in the world, if you're, on social media or traditional media and getting more than even 100,000 views, never mind millions, you've got to be a bit adventurous. But then when you add to that living overseas, you have got to be adventurous. So, some of the countries I've lived in, like Cambodia and others, yes, you have to be adventurous to live there. One thing I'm trying to guard against is it is natural as people get a little bit older to become less adventurous and more cautious. And I'm not saying that is always a bad thing, because often you can't be as adventurous if you have children, dogs, whatever. But by the same token, it's easy to kind of let age become a self-fulfilling prophecy and just say, oh, I'm in my 30s now, I have to be less adventurous than my 20s, or I'm in my 40s now, I have to be less adventurous than my 30s. But actually, a lot of the people who stay young and healthy, more often than not, they have a zest for life, right? And they take risks and things don't always go their way. And I think it's good to keep some of that as you get a bit older.
All right, so now that leads me into the next question, or the thing I wanted to pose to you. You mentioned about once you're putting yourself out there, you have, as an entrepreneur, whether you've got 1,000 views, tens of thousands, millions, but we are on here in this podcast, Beyond the Velvet Rope, with someone who, between social media and traditional media, over 1 billion views. And so this is also talking to someone who is very niche, and you're sharing something that you're not trying to attract everyone, but you found your audience. So what do you say, or how do you encourage someone, or advice do you give them when it comes to niching down, but still being in such demand, being seen as an authority, to have over 1 billion views from this very unique expat investment niche? Because I'm sure you hear all the time, or you've seen, where people are afraid to specialize because they think they're going to miss out. What do you say to that entrepreneur, that individual, that person that's on the fence of really narrowing down and saying, I'm going to be the best, I'm going to be the authority in this specialty?
Well, even if you niche down, you're still going to actually get a lot of views on a minority of your content. So, for example, if somebody niches down about, as a pure example, right now there are a lot of British people living in the UK, and there's a lot of young and relatively young people who are ranting on social media about the UK and how basically they should move overseas. And a lot of them are doing a very niche service like consulting, how to move overseas. But if you think about it, some of the topics they might talk about, like how the UK is difficult for young men right now, or the weather, or God knows what else, there's always going to be some that are really, really going to catch the imagination, and it's going to be a broad audience. But obviously, like if you get like 100,000 or 1 million views for one particular video or piece of content, naturally though, over 99% of those people are not going to be in your niche. But that's fine, right? Because in the social media world we live in today, I'm no expert on the algorithm, but what a lot of my team say is, since TikTok got into the whole game in a big way a few years ago, it's now possible for one video, one piece of content to get 100 views, and one to get 500,000 or 1 million, regardless of your follower count. It used to be the case that like it would be about followers or whatever, and that's changed, it seems. So I would say don't be afraid to niche down, because actually you will still get opportunities, because with a minority of your content, you're going to get a broad audience anyway. So if you're a creator on YouTube, for example, and you're making most of your money from advertising, even if you niche down, actually you'll find that some of your videos will just do very well anyway, I would say.
Good stuff. So speaking of niching down, niche, a question I have for you, with you coming in with the expat, the expatriates, those who are saying, all right, I'm going to live abroad, where does that and how does that play into the future of your business? I mean, I know being mobile, so having the service there, and then as you mentioned, things such as individuals leaving countries and going abroad at a younger age. How does your focus on the expat impact what we expect for Adam going into 26, 27, and even into 2030?
Well, we do think in the next, say, 10 years, even the next 5 years, there's going to be more people living overseas, because we also have to remember that with the whole remote working culture, more people can actually work from home now. So even though some of the big companies want their staff to go back to the office, it's still the case that more people can work at home compared to 10 years ago. So I'm sure in North America too, and Latin America, there are people obviously in Mexico and beyond who are Americans who are working for American companies, but they're living in Mexico or Costa Rica or Panama or whatever it is. And we also think that's going to get bigger. Also, as government policy becomes a little bit more populist when it comes to some of these things, like potentially wealth taxes or whatever, we think the movement between countries might change more. So we've seen some quite big movements. So we saw it in Hong Kong due to the political situation. We've seen it in the UK due to taxes and other things. We're also seeing it a bit in North America too. A lot of Canadians were leaving, and America is such a big population that there's always Americans or American residents leaving. So we actually think as policies change, there'll be more people going from country to country, because if some countries are more open, the likes of Mauritius, UAE, or whatever it is, Singapore, and some countries become more closed and more protectionist or more populist or whatever, then surely that's going to lead to more people being kind of more mobile, if you see what I mean, because there's kind of more demand and they're a little bit more insecure in their their home countries. So, for example, in the UK, there was a lot of talk about the incoming Labour government last year increasing taxes. So what happened? There was a massive move out of the UK for wealthy people. But for my business, personally, what I've been working on the last few years is delegation and doing less myself in terms of like the day-to-day client stuff, and more focusing on working on my business rather than in my business. In other words, having that high level thing where I kind of look down on what's happening and just try to influence the direction of the business. So right now, we're also buying into companies. So we're acquiring some companies in the international space. That could mean the license, that could mean the clients, that could mean the assets. Because another trend we see is in our industry, there's a lot of older people, and obviously some of them want to retire. And in the next 5 or 10 years, a lot of them will want to retire as well.
Okay, good stuff. So on a personal note, you've mentioned Mauritius twice, and my wife and I are huge fans of Mauritius. So now we are fans of Adam, and I'll be getting some advice from you going forward there. But as you talk about the different countries and policies and governments and the immigration of individuals, how is it that you are, and this is, I believe, a skill, how do you take something that is unsexy like policy, unsexy like finance, and then still make it attractive and desirable to your audience, right? Because this isn't something that everyone can effectively and clearly communicate, but solely based on the demand for you. You talk about supply and demand, right? There's only one Adam Fayed, but he is in constant demand. So how do you take something that many of us will say that is boring, unsexy, mundane, and turn it into, okay, I need to pay attention to this guy?
Well, I think it's got a bit easier down the years because this might not be a good thing, but I think in most parts of the world, people have become more politicized. So I've been to the US twice in the last month, and US, just like the UK, there's more people than before who want to speak about politics. I'm not saying that's necessarily a good thing because there's a lot of division in society these days, right? But it's true that more people are speaking about these issues than before, and more people are interested than before. And also, I would say what is new naturally attracts them, hence like the news being such a big thing. So policy announcements or the direction of travel, that does interest people. And ultimately, when it affects their bottom line as well, they're naturally going to be interested. Because I think for a lot of wealthy people as well, it's not just about like the lowest possible taxes or the lowest possible cost of living. It's also about stability in policy in terms of if you know where you are going to stand in the next few years broadly, that's quite attractive because at least then you can plan around that, if that makes sense. But if you've got a situation where the policy keeps changing and governments keep getting thrown out and there's a complete change of direction, that does add uncertainty. And I think people are naturally curious then about what are the other options out there? Are there certain countries that are a bit more stable than others?
Good stuff. So you just mentioned that one of the things that we often think about the wealthy, successful, affluent, high net worth individuals is that it's always about taxes or always about how much money they can keep. And that's not always the case. What are some other misconceptions and I'm speaking from the service provider who might be servicing or they desire to work in this space of successful individuals? What are some other misconceptions that you've experienced, that you're hearing, that we might have, and you say, well, no, that's not totally true. It's not always about the taxes. It's not always the money. And what's something that you have seen or that whispers that you've heard and you're saying, hey, you might want to do your research, double check, because that's not always the case?
I think a big thing as well is not just about lower taxes, but the idea that the international financial system is mainly for like dodgy money. I don't know if that was the case decades ago, but these days there's like, transparency of information and things like that. What is more true is that certain people are more likely to want to hide money from, say, a spouse or because of litigation and hiding it from the government. for example. So I think that's one big thing, because like if you watch The Wolf of Wall Street, you might have seen the scene where the lady, she's got all the cash on her, strapped on, and she's going to Switzerland on a private jet. Whereas now, getting a bank account in Switzerland is, however clean you are, is close to impossible in many cases for many individuals. So I think this idea that there's a lot of dirty money is absolutely wrong, that you're trying to hide it from government. But what is true is people do sometimes set up structures like trusts and foundations and so on, because they are worried about litigation, and it is what it is, but they're also worried about divorce in some cases. But that's the same domestically as well. I mean, let's face it, in the United States as well, in other places, that would be the same thing in the domestic market, right? So I was interviewing a lawyer on my podcast a few weeks ago, and he was making the point that some wealthy families, rather than having a prenuptial agreement, they prefer a trust so that their children are protected going into marriage. So I think it's not just something, for the international system. People might think it's unfortunate that people think like this, but the world, it is what it is, right? And I think that leads me to another thing. I think most wealthy individuals are more interested in protecting their wealth than just growing it per se. Because if you think about it, if you've already got enough money, you don't even need to be like super rich, but if you've just got enough money where you can live the rest of your life, unless there's like a double Great Depression or something like that, that's a pretty big incentive to say, you know what, I'm going to take some risk off the table here, but I don't want to be completely in cash or something like that, because that has its own risks. Devalue a lot. You don't even need to be in a Zimbabwe situation, but most wealthy people want to diversify. Because if you think about it as well, most wealthy people either got wealthy slowly via investing, get rich slow, or via entrepreneurship, which can be quicker, but it's more work, more effort, and risk. The ones who did it through entrepreneurship, if you can make 20, 30, or sometimes vastly more percentages in your primary business, why would you necessarily be interested in like speculating in meme coins and God knows what else with a large percent of your wealth? Because ultimately you could potentially make a lot more money in your primary business. So I think a lot of wealthy people, they are focused on structures like trusts and other things. But also when it comes to the portfolio, it's about actually preserving wealth, not just growing wealth. So maybe beating inflation, preserving the wealth is actually much more important than just greed, essentially.
So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're loving what Adam is saying, I'm going to encourage you first to go to adamfayed.com, adamfayed.com. I'll make sure that in the show notes, you have all of his contact info. But here's where I want to just go to the individuals who aren't uber wealthy, who aren't there yet. What's a piece of advice? Where do they start their financial journey, right? Or their investment, or even just their building their wealth? Mention that you started at the age of 18. Some of us are well beyond that, if we're going to be honest. So what's a piece that you would say? I know a lot of the clients that I work with in the real estate space, and they start talking about finances, the very first thing they say is, well, I don't know where to start. I'm afraid it's too late. If Adam had a chance to tell someone who's on the fence, who's considering it, where would you encourage us to start besides having a conversation with you? And you all, once again, can go to adamfayed.com to schedule that consultation or to just find out some next steps. But where would you have us begin, Adam?
Well, first of all, if you've got very little capital, I would read a little bit. You can read a few different books. You can read books like The Millionaire Next Door and other books. But also, you can just get started with small amounts of money. If you're not very sophisticated and you don't have an advisor, maybe start with some index funds, ETFs, the S&P 500, and so on. When you start to get more money, maybe 50, 100, 150,000, whatever it is, you can reach out to advisors. We also have a service, not via me, but via my team, where we can actually help people who have those kinds of money as well. But also you'll know people maybe within your network or beyond who can also help with that. So I think it depends where you are. If you've got $100 a month, $200 a month to invest, start small. Just learn, invest for yourself. As soon as you've got like 50, 100,000 or so, then maybe seek advice. That would be my suggestion.
So, Adam, I want to say you said something that just struck my heart. Dr. Thomas J. Stanley, the millionaire next door. Now, Unfortunately, I believe it is one of the best playbooks, especially to get people started, but it's not the sexy millionaire flash that we see. We have a different picture of what wealth creation and what wealthy and successful individuals look like. But for that to be the book that you reference, could you just talk a little bit about the idea or the perception of the successful and what success really looks like? Because I'm sure that when people hear what you do, they probably think that you yourself are being wheeled up in Rolls Royces and doing all of this stuff fancily. But the reality is that, as you mentioned, those who are looking to protect what they already have, that the flash, the glittering rich might not be their persona.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, right? There are plenty of people who have very high incomes who are very flash, but they don't necessarily have wealth, right? So I'm sure you have a lot of people like that in the US as well, just like London. You know, they work with big banks, corporate law firms, and sometimes they're very flash. In some cases, they're partners or whatever, but it doesn't mean they're building up wealth. So the point that Stanley was making in that book is that whilst there's a minority of wealthy people who do spend a lot, actually the most, or in the majority of cases, they are relatively conservative with spending. They spend below their means. What is true is that wealth is a basic equation. So your net income after taxes, taking away your spending, times the compounded growth is your net worth, right? So obviously, if you've got someone who's making millions and millions and millions a year, tens of millions, if they spend $1 million a year, that's still a very small percent of their income. But with the vast majority of wealthy people in, say, the 5 to 15, $20 million range, which is still much more wealth than most people have, most of them are quite frugal, because a lot of them, what they've done is they've just built up over time. So they've achieved that number, let's say 7, 8, 10 million or whatever, at quite an older age. They've just compounded over time. It's taken them time to do it. Most of them have never had a super high income. Some of them often have just had a bit of a better income than average. Let's say someone like an engineer, they're paid relatively well, but they start investing early, they have relatively good spending habits, they're not cheap. Sometimes they spend on luxury items, but everything about them is just a bit above average in terms of salary, a bit above average in terms of how they spend compared to others on that salary. Maybe they invest just a bit better than the average. And then that can actually mean that they could be worth 10 million, in retirement. It sounds unbelievable, but the maths is like that. What is true is there's a very small number of people who can get wealthier much more quickly via entrepreneurship. But the quote that it took me 10 years to be an overnight success is very true when it comes to this. When it comes to entrepreneurship, you're taking a much bigger risk. Time is a big thing, and not everyone is set up to do it. Not everyone should want to do it, and a very small percent of people will succeed. So it might seem like a fast lane to wealth, and it can be for a small minority of people, but that's the second route people can take. But also bear in mind, if you take that route, you're actually not going to have time in many cases for the first 5 or 10 years to be flash, right? You're not going to have time to even shave in the morning in some cases, never mind be kind of focusing on like what car you're going to have. So oftentimes they see the person after they've sold their business or their business is like stable after 10 years, and they think, wow, that person can, fly first or business, and they can do this, they can do that. But they didn't see the sacrifice before in some cases.
So I love every bit of that because that is the raw, honest truth. And here's what the reality is. Many of us need to be told the truth instead of sold the lies that are so prevalent when we look on social media, when we look around, when we get out in the neighborhood and we see the young person driving or living or painting their best life. And so that was all great advice. And so here's the question that I want to pose to Adam, the man. As you think about the advice that you just gave, my question would be, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
That's actually quite a difficult question, because I've received a lot of good and bad advice during the years. One piece of advice I received, and it shouldn't necessarily be taken literally, It's a quote that is sometimes attributed to Winston Churchill, sometimes it's attributed to other people. But an older guy once said to me that when you're 20, you care about what people think, and when you're 40, you stop caring about what people think. And when you're 60, you realize that nobody was thinking about you to begin with. And it shouldn't be taken completely literally from the point of view that obviously there are some people who are 30 who worked this out beforehand. There are some people who are 70 who still care about what people think. But it's true in general, people become more thick-skinned with age. And the reason is you do kind of learn that it's impossible to please everyone. As we see with any public figure, not just the controversial ones like the likes of Musk and Trump and so on, but even the non-controversial ones. Some people will hate them, some people will like them, that's okay. And ultimately as well, people will see whatever they want to see anyway, right? And so life is short. Don't allow other people's opinions to stop you, because I do think a lot of people out there, they want to put themselves out there on social media or starting a business or trying something, but the disparaging comments or whatever it is, the trolls, or people saying, oh, this guy or this woman, whatever, is a sham, or they scam me, or comments about their looks or whatever it is, I think that stops a lot of people, you know. But then when they look back on that, probably when they're older, then they'll regret that.
So all great stuff there. Now we're going to time travel just a little bit as we get ready to close this episode of Beyond the Velvet Rope podcast. So Adam Fayed, the successful man, functioning adult, seen billions of times. What would you, if you could time travel back and you had a chance to have a conversation with your 10-year-old self, what would Big Adam tell 10-year-old Adam today?
I think I would say enjoy the journey as much as possible, because like we often, as kids anyway, we think adults have it really good. And it's true that in some cases adults do. But when you're younger, you also have certain privileges and you can do certain things that you can't when you're an adult. So I think I would say enjoy the journey. As per the last quote, I wouldn't take everything so seriously. I wouldn't be affronted by every scandal or everything that happens. I would say, you know, grow a thick skin before your time, but stay young at heart as well. So it's kind of like, that's kind of the contradiction, I would say. I think it's great to be one of those people who can be like 70 years old and they can, you know, feel okay in the pub having drinks with the younger guys. That's great, right? But by the same token, if you can actually learn some of the realities of life in a way, like the previous quote, that is also good, because then you won't actually take things that seriously. If you go to, I don't know, high school or university and someone makes a disparaging comment or whatever, you can put it into context. But of course, hardly any young people have that because they don't have enough experience. So I would say, don't take things so seriously in some context. Don't take everything as an affront. And also try to control what you can control. I know it's really, really difficult to do that, because let's face it, if somebody makes, I don't know, a comment to you, in certain cases, like it could even be whatever, a racist comment or something really bad, but ultimately you can't control other people, you can only control yourself, right? And I think it was a Warren Buffett quote where he said that as soon as you allow people's words to affect you, they have control over you. You should just breathe and actually let it go. And I think that's very important. That doesn't mean you can't stand up for what you believe. If you, in your free time, want to be whatever, an activist or whatever it is, that's fine. But by the same token, remember as well that if you don't get affected by these things, ultimately the people saying those things, you know, whether it's a high school or wherever, that's the biggest kind of thing they would hate, right? That it's not affecting you. I would say all those things. So when I have kids, which hopefully will be soon, hopefully I can say those kind of things to them when they're 10 years old.
Absolutely. I love that. So I have one more question, and then we're going to go into some rapid fire fun stuff. So you mentioned that hopefully one day you'll be able to do some things with family, with kids. So what does Adam Fayed once said about him when he is no longer here? What legacy do you want to leave? When people think of Adam, what do you want to come to their mind?
Well, I think, I know I just quoted him before, but a second Buffett quote I would say is he once said, if you get to an old age and the people who are closest to you don't absolutely hate you, that's actually a good sign of success, because it's actually surprisingly rare that that's the case, right? There's some people that want to change the world, but they can't change their most important relationships, which is life. I get that. But like, still, ultimately, in the same way that charity starts at home, I would say the key relationships are going to be the most important thing for me, I would say. And then if I achieve that, hopefully people will say that I tried to make a difference in my own way. And, especially later on in life, I can maybe focus on, giving back as much as possible.
Awesome stuff, Mr. Adam Fayed. It has been an absolute pleasure. So now we get to have some fun. You've given us lots of gems, lots of jewels and insight. So now we're going to do a few rapid fire questions. I'm just going to throw some stuff out here to you. You do not know what I'm asking you. And if at any one of them you want to pass, feel free to pass, because they might get you in trouble. I'm going to start with a hard one first. The favorite country that you've ever lived in?
It depends for my time of life, I would say, but that's really difficult. But if you force me to actually give an answer,
I'm twisting your arm right now. You have to answer.
believe it or not, I might say South Korea, actually, maybe.
May I ask why, if you're comfortable sharing why?
Well, in some ways, it wasn't the best time because it was during COVID, but even though most Koreans wouldn't actually like me saying this, there's a lot of commonalities between Japan and Korea. So it's clean, it's orderly, and so on and so forth. But also, it is a bit more outgoing than somewhere like Japan. I think the most fun I had, maybe, in terms of like just having a good time, was in my Shanghai days. Even though China wasn't my favorite country, I really liked Shanghai as a city. But because of things like the VPNs and all the internet restrictions, that kind of maybe puts it a little bit below, say Korea or Japan. But yeah, I would say Korea or Japan were definitely up there with some of the best.
All right, now that we've got the hard stuff out of the way, favorite color?
I'll be quite boring and say probably, at least when it comes to clothes, probably white or black.
Okay, favorite food?
I would say probably certain types of seafood like salmon and some other seafood.
Okay, so you're going to the ocean. I love it. So I am not a seafood guy. My wife loves seafood, and so that's always the question or the rub when it's time to go out to eat. Favorite superhero?
I'll pass on that because I don't have a strong preference, actually.
Okay, now this one, I don't want you to get in trouble, but a nickname that only your family calls you.
That's a difficult one. Well, actually, not family, but speaking about the last one, the whole fish thing. I can remember when I was in school, some friends called me Fishy Fired when I told them I actually like fish. But in terms of family, I can't think of something off the top of my head right now.
Wait, so they called you Fishy Five?
Fishy Fired, because that's my second name.
Fishy Fired.
So that's just because, primary school kids, and once they said, what's your favorite food? And I said fish. And I said, Fishy Fired or something. So, yeah.
Okay, is it safe for me to assume that Fishy Fired has not traveled with you through adulthood, correct?
No, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So for my audience, when you all follow Adam, I do not want you all to refer to him as Fishy Fayed, right? So that is not going to be a good look in the circles in which he runs. All right. Now, this one is one where we really find out about the human being. What is one talent that you don't have that you wish you did?
Well, right now, actually, a good golfer, because I'm taking up golf, and it's one of the honestly, it's incredibly hard. I think being a good golfer now would be up there with some of the things I wish I could achieve.
So, Adam, I started playing golf at the demand of one of my clients 2 years ago. And you sit here and think, this is supposed to be a sport, right? The ball is not moving. We have the club. We're in total control, and we cannot figure it out. Like, as you said, this is one of those things. Baseball, we have the ball moving. Basketball, even skateboarding and all of this. But that little ball on that tee or on the ground has caused more swearing from people I know, not myself, and probably has caused more headaches and frustration than anything else. So I'm right there with you. Even 2 years in, I'm still hoping that I can become talented enough to get good at golf. So that's a good one. What's one thing that you can't live without?
Coffee.
Really? So how are you taking yours?
Usually just coffee. Sometimes other drinks, but usually coffee.
So now your coffee, are we talking black coffee strong with nothing, or are we dolling it up a little bit?
Usually strong black coffee. I used to take more milk and sugar, but I think in reality, I've pretty much cut out most sugar from my diet. And I think if you're going to have coffee, just having black coffee is probably much healthier. So I've just tried to keep the black coffee and espressos as much as possible, but I still probably have a bit too much. But my body seems pretty resistant to it at this point.
Good stuff. So Adam said, I need the caffeine. Favorite movie, if you have one?
Favorite movie? That's a good question. Actually, when I was a kid anyway, I was really into a lot of the James Bond movies, which sound really cheesy. And some of the old ones I was a big fan of, like the Sean Connery ones, like Goldfinger and so on. But in more recent times, I think the Bourne movies were actually really good for an adult, like the Bourne Identity and that franchise. But I don't actually have a lot of time to watch movies these days, so I can't say I'm a big consumer anymore of movies.
All great choices, and I love the fact that you are a true entrepreneur, trailblazer, and ambitious individual to say, hey, I loved these. I think they're great, but the time is not there. We're trying to build something. We're trying to create. And so the last one, I know that you're a well-read individual, that you are constantly taking in information so that you can be aware. What is one of your favorite books or one of your favorite authors, sir?
One author who has only become prominent in recent times, but I've been following him now for about 7 years, is an author called Daniel Priestley. And he wrote...
You better stop playing. So let me tell you, Daniel Priestley, he's my guy. I'm talking about everything from key person of influence, scorecard marketing, or if it's going to be oversubscribed, I am a huge fan, and he's across the pond. Right. So to hear you say that lets me know that I'm here with kindred spirits. Keep going. I'm sorry, I got excited.
Absolutely. But the funny thing is, in the last year or two, he's become much more, especially the last year, he's become much more known, it seems, around the world, because he also had a debate recently, quite a prominent debate, and he was on the Diary of a CEO, which of course is one of the most listened to podcasts. Well, I think it's the most listened to podcast now in the UK, or certainly the top 10. But when I started reading him in 2018, actually, it seemed like not that many people knew who he was. I thought he was really good. A lot of the advice he was giving, and especially relevant for the digital world, because ultimately in the digital world, it's a very different world from before. And most people are going in as like a David rather than a Goliath, of course, and even 10 years in, compared to like the big banks or Amazon or whatever, you're still a David compared to a Goliath, right? So I think a lot of his suggestions are actually really useful. And what he's talking about now in terms of the AI revolution, even more so, because we're going to actually go into a world where potentially a small team can actually beat some bigger teams in certain cases. So I think he's also adapting that to his message as well. So I'd say definitely from an entrepreneurial standpoint, he's someone to listen to for sure.
Now, I have a question. Have you had a chance to meet or have him on your podcast yet?
I haven't actually, but I'd like to speak to him one day. So I think he's in London these days, but he would definitely be a great guest. So we've had some good guests on, but he could be hopefully our guest.
And if you all are listening, if you all know Daniel Priestley, after you all get him on Adam's podcast, I want him over here on Beyond the Velvet Rope. We have a respect for him, what he's doing, the messaging, but then also I love the authenticity that he delivers it with, really peeling back the layers and showing people how he's built, what the challenges are. But then also, as you mentioned, Adam, that he is looking ahead. And I think it's a hard place for many people to say, yes, I've experienced success. I could keep doing it this way for maybe another 3 to 5 years and we would be okay. But he's still pushing the envelope and saying, we're comfortable here, but this is what we see coming. And he's leading by example and really taking that front forward. So that was a great thing there. Before we go, anything you want to share with the audience today, Adam?
Well, just it's been good to share my thoughts with you. And if you want to reach out as well, on my website, you can see my email and my WhatsApp and beyond. And also don't be afraid, because you know what we're speaking about earlier, people don't want to put themselves out there sometimes. I guess there's people who don't want to reach out, and They don't want to kind of make contact because they assume things like, okay, he's too busy, or he won't want to help me, or this and this and this. And I'm not saying those assumptions are never true, but they're not always true. So at the end of the day, I think getting into the habit of reaching out to people, making contacts, and so on, it's always a good thing, because the worst thing that happens is it goes to the spam box or junk mail. It really isn't a big deal, and it doesn't even usually go there, right? So I think a lot of people want to actually reach out to us and they don't, but they shouldn't feel a sense of intimidation, of course, about reaching out to us.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you can see Adam's contact info, his email address, website, and his WhatsApp number on the screen right now. And the information will also be in our show notes. If you want to contact Adam, make sure you do. That is a big misconception. So when I'm in front of 60 to 70,000 agents a year in real estate, and I say, hey, here's my cell number, here's my personal email, come in and schedule a consultation. And out of the 60 or 70,000, we get about 12 to 18 people that say, hey, I know you're busy. I'm like, I've been waiting for you. Right here I am. Yes, we're doing things, but as you mentioned, this is also why we build our business as entrepreneurs, so that we can get to the point where we're working on it and not in it, so that then we can have those conversations and truly make those connections. Mr. Adam Fayed, I want to tell you, sir, that today has been a treat. It's been a blessing for me. I know the audience is going to enjoy it as well. And ladies and gentlemen, as I always do, I want to leave you with this. Remember that I love you, God loves you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And until the next time we see you or you see us, don't be average, be world renowned. Adam, thank you so much for your time, sir.